The gospel lesson this morning is from the Gospel of John, chapter 8, verses 31 through 38. I know a lot of you read your Bible every day, but if you're looking for a challenge, if you really want to challenge yourself, read Gospel of John, chapter 7 and 8. It's really, really thick reading. And if you're reading this, you're going to be challenged. But if you have patience and you read it slowly, you're going to read some really rich material. So John 7 and 8, I invite you to read that. But for now, let's read John chapter 8, verses 31 through 38. Let us hear now these words of the Lord. Then Jesus said to the Jews who had believed in him, "If you continue in my word, you are truly my disciples, and you will know the truth, and the truth will make you free." They answered him, "We are the descendants of Abraham, and have never been slaves to anyone. What do you mean by saying you will be made free?" And Jesus answered them, "Very truly, I tell you, everyone who commits a sin is a slave to sin. The slave does not have a permanent place in the household. The son has a place there forever, though. So if the Son makes you free, you will be free indeed. I know that you are descendants of Abraham, yet you look for an opportunity to kill me because there is no place for you in my word. I declare what I have seen in my Father's presence. As for you, you should do what you have heard from the Father." And this is the word of God for all the people of God. Thanks be to God. Amen. I know a lot of you are very excited about this week. You know, Thursday, it's Halloween. A lot of your parents will be dressing up your kids in really great costumes, going in the neighborhood, getting some candy. A lot of grandparents will be doing the same. And then there's a lot of us who are just going to enjoy being at home and opening the door for trick-or-treaters. I love that. I love doing that. I always, every year at Halloween, I think back to when I was a kid. We had this great neighborhood nearby. I mean, this is like the neighborhood to go trick-or-treating. All the houses would try to one-up each other with decorations. And there were these houses that would try to scare the trick-or-treaters. I mean, they did things back then that you cannot get away with in 2019. There's one house, every year they would say, they may not be there, but they would say, if you want your candy, you got to put your hand to the door. And inevitably, it would grab someone's hand, There would be people who would be sitting on their porch dressed in costume with the bowl of candy in their lap, and you just know they're going to reach out and grab it. There was this one house, though. These two brothers, they were a little bit older than we were, and we were friends with them. We played football in their backyard, but every year there was some sort of jump scare when you went to their house. And this one year, this is our favorite house, by the way, because we love that stuff. We went to their house, we sort of creeped through their yard because we knew it was coming. But we didn't see any Halloween decorations. There was no sort of scary noises. And we got to the front porch and we knocked on the door, and it was their mom. Her mom opened the door and said, "Hello, boys. Good evening." We said, "Good evening." And she said, "How are y'all doing? Are we okay?" And everything was normal. We thought, maybe it's not gonna happen this year. And then she said, "Have y'all seen my two boys anywhere?" I said, "No." "Well, I haven't seen them in 2 or 3 days. I just don't know what could have happened to them." "So, I haven't seen my dog either. You know what my dog is?" I said, "I haven't seen your dog." Even as a kid, I was like, "Why are you bringing your dog into the story?" And I said, I did notice a trail of blood in the backyard going into the woods. I don't know what that was about. "So maybe you should call the police." "Maybe I will tomorrow." "Yeah, maybe I will." "Well, if you see my boys, let me know where they are." And then she shut the door. I think she was like a guidance counselor if she was going to be one, which is ironic because when we trick-or-treated at her house, we needed some counseling later. But then we turned around and we knew from the porch that we were on to the road that we needed to get to, something was going to happen. We knew it. And so we kind of tiptoed off their porch and went to the yard. And then, of course, one of the brothers jumped down from a tree dressed as a zombie. And the other brother came running around the house full-on zombie makeup, flanking us. And we were running out our way, and we were running to the road. And then we did what boys do. We said, "Well, that didn't scare me." "That scared you?" "That didn't scare me." "I thought you were scared." We pretend like it wasn't a big deal. Of course, we loved that stuff. But, that's a real-life scenario, not the zombies part, but the being on the porch, the point A, and then looking out and seeing point B. We all today are at point A, at some facet of our life, God is calling us out off the porch to go somewhere else. But we know there is something in between here and there that's going to be scary. That's going to make you pause and give you hesitation. There's going to be something out there that might cause you to say, you know what, I think I'll just stay right here on this porch. No one's going to blame you for staying here, so I might as well just stay here. And I guess I wonder this morning if God is calling you off the porch today to do something. God is calling you to take a little risk, to do something that might scare you. There's a lot of history in today's sermon. So if you don't like history, I'm so sorry. But I will make it as interesting as I can. But I want to begin in the first century. Because in the first century, Christians were being oppressed, and there was lots of threats of violence. There was this emperor named Nero, and this guy, I mean, he just did it for sport. I mean, he was threatened by Christians, and so he would, arrest them. And maybe you've heard stories about Christians being thrown into the arena in the Colosseum, and there are lions, they get devoured by lions. You may have heard of Nero using Christians as like human torches. I won't describe for you what that is, but you can pretty much guess. And then there's a long history of this sort of acts of violence against Christians. But then in the 1970s, in Chile, there was this guy who came to power. He was a general of Pinochet. And he said, you know what? We don't want to turn these Christians who were rebelling against his regime, we don't want to turn them into martyrs. Because martyrs inspire. The great church historian Tertullian said that the blood of the martyrs is the seed of the church. Martyrs can inspire people to live more faithfully. He said, I don't want to turn them into martyrs. I want to instill in them fear. This is in the 1970s. And so here's what he would do. He would kidnap these Christians who were rebelling against the regime, take them from their homes in the middle of the night, and then he would torture them. They would walk out, then someone else would walk in and be their friend, give them hope, give them food, and then that cycle will repeat itself over and over again. Until every time the door opened, they were terrified. And all of a sudden, this courageous person living boldly for God became a nervous wreck. They did this until they psychologically broke them. But they wouldn't kill them. Once they were broken, they would drop them off on their front porch. And then once the family and the community saw how broken this person was, it actually suppressed the revolution. They no longer had courage anymore. Because someone who was now courageous was now a shell of themselves. They were a nervous wreck. And here's what they realized. The reason I tell you this isn't to freak you out before Halloween. The reason I tell you this is because this understanding of fear being the greatest deterrent for those on the side of good. That's sort of evil's playbook today. We live in a Christian society and we say, there's not a lot of violence in our area. There's not a lot of things to be afraid of. Evil doesn't really run rampant here in Wilmington, but yes, it does, just in very subtle ways. Evil has learned that the best way to deter Christians from doing good is to make them scared, is to instill in them a sense of fear. To a smaller degree, we see these in leaders today. There are regimes all over the world who are just harping on fear, making the people underneath them afraid. Pay attention to that. Any leader who tries to instill fear in people, usually the truth is not on their side. Watch for that. But by and large, the greatest enemy to truth, the greatest enemy to freedom is fear, because it is said that fear can drive people to do terrible things. Fear can also drive really good people to do nothing at all. And that's what's happening in that story. And so here comes Jesus. He's talking to these Jews. And he says that a lot of you are not free. A lot of you think you're free, but you're really not. You're stuck in sin. And he says that the way to be free is to be firm in the truth. He says the word that he uses is to dwell in the truth. And then he says that the truth will set you free. That's not some sort of abstract platitude that people will say. That's actually biblical. That's scriptural. The truth will set you free. And when he says that, they snap back. We are free, man. We've been free our whole lives. And Christ says, no, I'm not talking about a physical kind of freedom. I'm talking about a spiritual freedom. I'm talking about something deeper. In our Bible study right now, we're studying a book called Life Together. It's a Christian classic by Dietrich Bonhoeffer. He was a German theologian living in Germany during the, of course, he's a German theologian, but he was living in Germany in the 1930s, and he was a kind of a Doogie Howser type. He got his PhD at 21 years old, and there he is. And then, in his 30s, he begins to run this sort of the Christian community that was apart from the rest of the world because the Nazi regime had their grips on the church, and they were using the Christian church as a way to project Nazi values. And so he began his own sort of Christian seminary. And when they were found by the Nazis, they all had to flee. And Bonhoeffer fled to America, and for a year in New York, he taught in America, but then was riddled with guilt because he said, I've got to go back to my homeland. I've got to be with the Christians there. I'm escaping reality. And so he goes back, and this man, who was a pacifist, by the way, he actually joined a group of people who were conspiring to kill Hitler. He said, I'm a pacifist, but for Hitler, I can break this rule. And he gets caught. And for the last 2 years of his life, in his late 30s, he's in a prison cell. He is physically bound in a small cell, in chains. He is physically bound, but spiritually this man is completely free. If he had stayed in New York, he would have been a spiritual captive, but in a prison cell, he was spiritually free. In fact, the prison guards began to really love and care for him. They saw how fervently he prayed. They would let him out of his cell. Let him walk down to the next cell to pray with other prisoners. They would send letters for him out in the community. Anyone who was around this guy began to love him. He was physically bound but spiritually free. And they executed him 2 weeks before the liberation of that camp. But he died a free man. So here in America, we have an abundance of freedom, and we have a lot of brave people to thank for that. This country, probably more than any other country, has more freedoms in the history of the world. We have all these wonderful freedoms, yet many of us are not free, physically free, but spiritually captive. And what keeps us captive, very simply, is fear. Fear of the unknown, fear of what could happen to us for our safety, the safety of others, fear of what could happen in our careers. I mean, just name them. There's a host of fears that hold us captive. And I want to challenge you today, at the end of your life, wouldn't it be great if people looked at you and said, this person lived courageously. This person lived fearlessly. Would they be able to say that about you right now? Think about that for a moment. So I want to ask you today, how free are you? Most of us can probably travel anywhere in the world. We have passports. Maybe we have resources to go out of the country. We can drive anywhere in the country we want to. But are you really free? One of my great vulnerabilities in life has been my intelligence. I never got as good of an SAT score as my peers. I wanted higher. I was terrible at math. I had to retake math one time in high school. I was so bad at math. And when I went to seminary, I had this fear that I wasn't going to make it. I wasn't up to snuff. That I just was going to flunk out. I just didn't think I could cut it. And I remember the first week of seminary, this is so bad, they asked me to read this really thick book and to write a paper on it. And then you had to give it to someone else in class randomly, and they would read it and grade it and kind of say what they thought about it out loud. It's pretty nerve-wracking. Well, I read this book, and I wrote a paper on it, and I thought it was polished, it was great, it was good work. And then I exchanged it with someone else, and this girl across the room gives me her paper, and I'm reading it like, oh no. Oh no. Oh, this is good. Oh, this is too good. Oh, is this what work is? Oh, is this what a good paper is? Oh no. Like I am so far below this. And I remember just wanting to just go across the room and grab my paper and take it back. Like I don't want anyone else to read this because it was so, I didn't even understand it. It was so brilliant. And I had to read her paper and say, here's the grade. I said, I give it an A+. I don't know what it means, but I give it an A+. There are words in here I don't know. And she got to mine, and she was a very kind person. She said, this is a good paper. You made some good thoughts here. The writing is good. But all of my vulnerabilities were just out there all of a sudden in the open, and it threw me into a crisis of confidence. And I wondered in my first week of seminary, should I even be here? Should I even be in seminary at all? Am I in the right path? It was one of these moments where a little fear kind of blew up. You ever have a little fear, it sort of blows up in your head, and before you even realize it, it's just so big. That's what, when Christ says the truth will set you free, that's not some abstract thing. He's talking about moments like this. Yes, there was this person in this room who was smarter than me and a better writer than me, but you know what? She also got her PhD She was our valedictorian. She literally wrote a book. That's at Barnes & Noble right now. I saw it a few months ago, and I got her book. I was like, well, that makes sense. And I put it in front of a biography of Pope Benedict, and I messaged her, and I said, hey, I put you ahead of the Pope. And I said, yes, there's going to be someone smarter than me, but that doesn't change the fact that I was supposed to be there. That God called me for that moment. That I was exactly where I was supposed to be. But fear, because fear is oppressive, it was bringing me down. Ever have a fear do that to you? Stop you from going from point A to point B? Your fear can be very paralyzing. It can be very paralyzing. The antidote to fear is always going to be truth. And the reality was, I wasn't the smartest guy ever, but I was called to it. And truth can set you free. Martin Luther, I'm going to show you a video in a moment. Go ahead and set up that video if you can. Martin Luther, this is Reformation Sunday. I'm the only Methodist mentioning this. But Reformation Sunday is a day when we remember the Protestant reformers. You may remember this from high school. This is a guy, he was a very passionate Christian, but he discovered some abuses of the Catholic Church. This is not the Catholic Church today, but 500 years ago. And he realized that the Catholic Church had gotten away by being saved by faith. They were more about works. And he also discovered some of their abuses. They were sort of ripping off Christians, playing on their emotions to, make the church richer. And so he begins doing all of these writings, all of these speakings, and finally the Catholic Church brings him in under threat of death. They bring him in, they put all of his writings in front of him on a table, and there's this big climactic moment. There's people everywhere, and they ask him, are these your works? He says, yeah. And he says, do you recant of all of your writings? And he gives this very famous speech. It's called the Here I Stand speech. But this guy, this moment, really the whole world was watching. This is a huge event. And he said at the very end, here I stand, I can do no other. God help me. God help me. When was the last time you exhibited that kind of courage? One of my professors in college, he said that there are all these accounts that when he walked out of the room that day, he held this stuff like this. This is what knights did when they won a jousting contest. It was a sign of victory. And he knew he had won. And he knew likely he was going to be killed. He knew that he was going to be hunted down. He wasn't killed. He actually survived, but he knew that he would leave there that day as a free man because the truth that he had dwelled in, that he had proclaimed, was what set him free. When was the last time you showed that kind of courage in your life? So here is this moment. Martin Luther, who says in Wittenberg, the truth will set you free. And I wonder how many of you need to hear that today. I wonder how many of you are captive. Probably all of you have heard the company Johnson & Johnson. They make a lot of products for babies and families. And back in the 1940s, one of their founders actually made a credo. We've got that for you here. I want to show it to you. This is their credo. This is sort of their moral statement here. And this is very unusual for a company. Usually a company, they're within their kind of vision or mission, whatever. It's about making money, But here's what they say. They say, we believe our first responsibility is to the patients, doctors, and nurses, to mothers and fathers, and all others who use our services. This is from the 1940s. In the 1970s, I know the 1970s is ancient history, that's like 100 years ago, but in the 1970s, here's what was going on at Johnson & Johnson. The founder of that, or the owner of that company, he was saying, people don't know our credo. People don't care about our credo. The employees don't know it. Maybe we should change it. They had a board meeting one time where they put the credo on the table and they said, maybe we need to change who we are and just be a money-making enterprise. Well, as they were debating this on September 30th, 1982, tragedy struck. In Chicago, some madman had gone into all of these Tylenol bottles. Johnson & Johnson produced Tylenol, and they had laced the pills with cyanide. And 7 people died taking Tylenol. They were taking their own poison. And this became a huge, huge national story, and people were shaming Tylenol and Johnson & Johnson, but really it wasn't their fault. It was just some madman out there. And 4 days after this occurred, after Chicago was just, in array, white Boy Scouts were going door to door telling people, don't take Tylenol. San Francisco, way out there even, they were saying, don't flush your Tylenol in the toilet because it's going to contaminate the sewers. But anyway, there was all of this concern about Tylenol. And so Johnson & Johnson, the leaders of Johnson & Johnson met with the FBI and the FDA to kind of get a game plan together to figure out what to do. And the FBI told them, look, you need to recall the Tylenol, but only in Chicago, not anywhere else, because it's going to encourage copycats if you do a total recall throughout the country. The guy who did it, he's going to be empowered, that he may do it again. Also, you're going to lose a ton of money if you do that. That was what the FBI told them to do. So the leadership of Johnson & Johnson, they went back to their headquarters, and they decided in that moment then that they would not listen to the FBI, and that they would do a total recall of all the Tylenol in all of the country. That decision cost them $100 million, which in the 1980s was a huge, huge amount. That's a pretty big amount today, I guess, right? But the company almost sank because of that decision. And someone asked them, why would you do a total recall of Tylenol? And they said, because our credo says that our first responsibility is to doctors and nurses and mothers and fathers and families. And that's what they would want us to do. Well, isn't it refreshing to hear about an institution that has a credo and sticks to it? Do you have something like that? Some sort of creed, some sort of truth that you so believe in so firmly that you are immersed in it and that you are willing to say, here I stand, God help me. You know, Jesus said, not just any truth. There's a lot of truth out on the internet. You know, postmodernity says that we can find our own truth. You know, everyone is entitled to discovering their own truth, but God says, no, postmodernity, no. It is my truth. I am the truth. Dwell in me. I am the truth, and the truth will set you free. And so what is your truth this morning? Are you firm in that truth? What is your credo today? How much courage are you exhibiting in your life? I want to leave you today with the words of Jesus. Very, very simple words. It's simply this. The truth will set you free. The truth will set you free. Where in your life are you being held captive? Discover what the truth is. And God promises you, you will be set free. Let us pray. God, we thank you for your word. We thank you for your life and for the example that you set for us. And all of the major decisions in our lives and all of the difficult challenges would help us to dwell in your truth. May it be your truth that inspires us to live courageously in this world. May we stand so firmly on that truth that we might be an inspiration to others, that we might be a witness to others to become Christian themselves. And so, Lord, help us not just to be seekers of that truth, but doers of that word. To let that truth flow from our lives. And Lord, help us all to be people where at the end of our life, people will say about us, they lived courageously. They lived fearlessly. Help us to live such lives. In your name we pray. Amen. Church, let us stand. Continue praising God.